I have no doubt that if you set your mind to it and had enough time and enough political power, you could breed a race of superior bodybuilders, or high jumpers, or shot putters, pearl fishers, sumo wrestlers, or sprinters, or, I suspect, although now with less confidence because there are no animal precedents, superior musicians, poets, mathematicians, or wine tasters. The reason I'm confident about selective breeding for athletic prowess is that the qualities needed are so similar to those that demonstrably work in the breeding of racehorses and cart horses, of greyhounds and sledge dogs. The reason I'm still pretty confident about the practical feasibility, though not the moral or political desirability, of selective breeding for mental or otherwise uniquely human traits is that there are so few examples where an attempt at selective breeding in animals has ever failed, even for traits that might have been thought surprising. Who would have thought, for example, that dogs could be bred for sheep-herding skills, or pointing, or bull-baiting? You want high milk yield in cows? Selective breeding can give it to you. Cows can be modified to grow vast and ungainly udders, and these continue to yield copious quantities of milk indefinitely, long after the normal weaning period of a calf. And of course, the same would be true of humans, if anyone wanted to try. About 25 years ago, I developed a computer simulation to illustrate the power of artificial selection, a kind of computer game equivalent to breeding prize roses or dogs or cattle. The player is faced with an array of 9 shapes on the screen, computer biomorphs, the middle one of which is the parent of the surrounding 8. All the shapes are constructed under the influence of a dozen or so genes, which are simply numbers handed down from parent to offspring, with the possibility of small mutations intervening on the way. A mutation is just a slight increment or decrement in the numerical value of the parent's gene. Each shape is constructed under the influence of a particular set of numbers which are its own particular values of the dozen genes. The player looks over the array of 9 shapes and sees no genes, but chooses the preferred body shape she wants to breed from. The other 8 biomorphs disappear from the screen, the chosen one glides to the center, and spawns 8 new mutant children. The process repeats for as many generations as the player has time for, and the average shape of the organisms on the screen gradually evolves as the generations go by. Only genes are passed from generation to generation, so by directly choosing biomorphs by eye, the player is inadvertently choosing genes. This is just what happens when breeders choose dogs or roses to breed from. So much for the genetics. The game starts to get interesting when we consider the embryology. The embryology of a biomorph on the screen is the process by which its genes, those numerical values, influence its shape. Many very different embryologies can be imagined, and I've tried out quite a few of them. My first program, called Blind Watchmaker, uses a tree-growing embryology. A main trunk sprouts 2 branches, then each branch sprouts 2 branches of its own, and so on. An important feature of the branching tree embryology is that it is recursive. A single mutation typically has an effect all over the tree, rather than just in one corner of it. Although the Blind Watchmaker program starts off with a simple branching tree, it rapidly wanders off into a wonderland of evolved forms, many with a strange beauty, and some, depending on the intentions of the human player, coming to resemble familiar creatures such as insects, spiders, or starfish. In the real world of agriculture and horticulture, the world of the pigeon fancier or dog breeder, artificial selection can achieve so much more. Darwin had first-hand experience of the power of artificial selection, and he gave it pride of place in Chapter 1 of On the Origin of Species. He was softening up his readers to take delivery of his own great insight, the power of natural selection. If human breeders can transform a wolf into a Pekingese or a wild cabbage into a cauliflower in just a few centuries or millennia, why shouldn't the non-random survival of wild animals and plants do the same thing over millions of years?
We have now seen how the human eye, working by selective breeding over many generations, sculpted and kneaded dog flesh to assume a bewildering variety of forms, colours, sizes, and behaviour patterns. Are there other animals that do the same thing as human breeders, perhaps without deliberation or intention, but with similar results? Yes, and they carry this book's softening up programme steadily forward. We now embark on a step-by-step seduction of the mind as we pass from the familiar territory of dog breeding and artificial selection to Darwin's giant discovery of natural selection via some colourful intermediate stages. The first of these intermediate steps along the path of seduction, is it over the top to call it a primrose path? Takes us into the honeyed world of flowers. Wild roses are agreeable little flowers, pretty enough, but nothing to write home about in the terms one might lavish on, say, peace or lovely lady or Ophelia. Wild roses have a delicate aroma, unmistakable, but not to swoon for like Memorial Day or Elizabeth Harkness or Fragrant Cloud. The human eye and the human nose went to work on wild roses, enlarging them, shaping them, doubling up the petals, tinting them, refining the bloom, boosting natural fragrances to heady extremes, adjusting habits of growth, eventually entering them in sophisticated hybridization programs until today, after decades of skillful selective breeding, there are hundreds of prized varieties, each with its own evocative or commemorative name. Who would not like to have a rose named after her?
Roses tell the same story as dogs, but with one difference, which is relevant to our softening up strategy. The flower of the rose, even before human eyes and noses embarked on their work of genetic chiselling, owed its very existence to millions of years of very similar sculpting by insect eyes and noses, well, antennae, which is what insects smell with. And the same is true of all the flowers that beautify our gardens. Not all the work was done by insects. For some flowers, the pollinators that did the initial selective breeding were hummingbirds, bats, even frogs, but the principle is the same. Garden flowers have been further enhanced by us, but the wild flowers with which we started only caught our attention in the first place because insects and other selective agents had been there before us. Generations of ancestral flowers were chosen